Now we're on to stage 2 of our lovely landscape. Remember that we took a photograph and we edited it, and we took out certain parts, we extended it slightly sideways, and we did a lovely tonal study of it last time. So now we're going to apply color. Let's take a really quick look at my palette, as messy as it is. It's white and black. I have a very vibrant orange, yellow ochre, a deep burnt sienna, green, a hooker green is great, and this is a phthalo yellow green, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, and a yellow. Whether I use all of those or not, I want the options on my palette. So I'm going to use the cerulean blue and white up here in the sky. I want to tone it down and absolutely just a smidge. I don't want it to be so vibrant. So I'm going to use just the smallest amount of orange in there to gray it down. When you're adding colors like that into the mix, add small amounts at a time, because oranges and all of the dark warmer colors can change a color very quickly. So I'm just going to load up my number 8 bright, and I'm going to go right ahead and put that little strip of sky in. And I'm going to start to put just white in there with it, because I don't want a real solid block of blue up there either. So by putting in some white and doing a real soft blend, I'm going to get a little bit of variation in the sky itself. Here we go. There we are. That was the quickest sky I've ever done. Cleaning my brush, wiping it dry. I'm going to start painting from the back forward, and I want to make sure that these back hills aren't too vibrant, because all the vibrancy is going to be right down here at the front. So I'm going to mix up a little bit of that hooker green, a little bit of orange. That'll gray it a smidge. It'll also kind of sage it out a little bit, or warm it up a bit, brown it. A little bit of white, push it back a bit. So I'm going to get a very grayish green, which is what I want. I don't want it to be as bright as down here. And I know that the left side of my hills are a little bit darker than the right side, which is where that light source is. So I'm just kind of coming in and filling in. And in order to do the middle section, I'm going to take the yellow ochre, not as bright as my cadmium, so that I still get a yellowish tone to the fields at the back here there we go, that mid-tone that we're looking for. Real soft blend, not over blended, because I still want all the contours to kind of be there. Getting some of my darker color back, and I'll go ahead and put those in. Sometimes you just got to let the paint do what it's going to do, because it might do some of the work for you. Even letting some of that underpainting show through can be quite helpful. Okay, so now I want to brighten it up a little bit as I'm coming forward. So let's put in a little bit of the cadmium yellow light with the green into the darker muddy mix. So I'm not coming forward too bright, and I'm going to put that in here, starting to get a little more color saturation. The other thing I noticed in my photograph was how kind of lavendery some of the back fields were. So I don't really know, even looking at the photograph, whether that was vegetation or the mineral content of the soil. As an artist though, I kind of like it. So I'm going to add a little bit of a crimson, there we go, on my palette. And I'm going to knock it back a little bit with some yellow ochre. And give these fields here a little blush of a kind of a crimsony soil color. And this is done in a very dilute way, so you can almost actually utilizing some of the lines that we've already created right in there. Maybe throw in a little bit over here. And then I'm going to pick up some yellow ochre and back to that brighter green with some white. Yellow ochre. Still staying in the same families. I'm just going to create very undefined hillsides. However, things are happening there, they're not blank. The thing is, I'm using a larger brush, even though the detail is a little smaller, because I really want to stay away from trying to get into huge detail there. It's really easy to do when you're doing smaller areas like that, and it can be quite fun, but it defeats the whole purpose of it being in the distance. You kind of lose that whole feeling of a distance, actually. So now I'm going to pull that purple back in by using a little crimson and a little of the ultramarine blue and some white. I'm going to create that color that I'm seeing in there and maybe get a little of that going here on these hills. A shortcut would be to use a dioxazine purple and tone it down a little bit with some of your yellow ochre. And I'm doing this pretty quickly because I don't, as I said, want to spend a lot of time getting the temptation to do detail will come if you stay too long on these spots here. I'm throwing in a little bit of orange. Let's see what happens to that here. It warms it up, adds a bit of variation, creates that contour. So we have interest in our middle ground and our background without there being real specific detail, and that's exactly what we want. So we can bring some of the light really hitting in here. And then it starts to get a little darker on the other side. Pull in some of the green on that orange. Up on that mountain. Little hillside there. And here as well. All right. So now let's go ahead and put these middle pieces in here. We'll want to get the darker green, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little orange in with that and bring it up to a nice deeper woodier green and put those rows in. I'm painting over the cypress, as you can see. I can still see them, I know where they're going to go now, but I'm not going to let that interfere with the brush strokes that I'm trying to make here. Just getting that green in. I'm going to take that same orange and hooker green, and I'm going to add a tiny bit of yellow, a cadmium yellow, into it, which makes it quite vibrant compared to the darker green that we were using. And I'm going to go ahead and put some of the trees back in here, and I'm just pushing in with the corner of my brush. I'm not trying to create specific rows of trees here. They're going to kind of using that color that we did in the undertone painting. We're going to use those lines to help us tell the eye that there are in fact lines of trees there. I'm just kind of putting in some sporadic light green pieces. It's kind of a real mid-green, it's not real bright. So then I'm going to add a tiny bit of white to that same color, and very carefully, not a lot, but put a few little dabs to indicate some of the light sides of those trees. We're going to let the eye fill the rest of that in for us. We don't need to spell it all out. our eye's going to see that once we get all of this in together. A little bit more so here. I'm just going to create a kind of a fallow field here. So I'm going to use that same nice lighter green between all the darker green. As you can see, I'm just going right through those cypress. Our light source is up here on the right, remember? So these nice light fields will give us a nice break from some of the darker stuff that we have going on. So I'm going to put a little bit more of that orange and green. I'm letting some of the orange peek through. There's not a lot of detail on this particular field. And once we put our cypress back in, we'll be able to see that field more clearly, in fact, when we have to look through something. So let's go ahead and put the dirt back down on this guy here. And the very front one, I'm going to pick up some of that burnt sienna and yellow ochre. And I'm going to pick up some white and make the substrate, or the dirt that's underneath. I'm going kind of colorful, so stay with me. So I'm going to very lightly go over the top of that yellow ochre. So some of the yellow ochre can actually show through. When you're painting, think about how you can use the different levels or layers that you're creating, how you can actually use some of those to help throughout the rest of the painting. Sometimes the unexpected color popping up underneath is really, can make or break a painting. I'm using just a little bit of water to help the color move along. I'm going to add a little bit more white as I get further out here towards the back end there. Again, I don't want the painting to feel too gloomy, so I'm just kind of patching it in. It's soil, it's earth, so it changes from with the contours and what things that are going on. You don't want this to be one solid. And you notice that my strokes are kind of all over the place, a little bit crisscrossy, but they're short and slightly blending, not a lot. When people are we have done this particular one at the studio that I teach in, and one of the things that people get concerned about is, oh my gosh, I didn't mix up enough of the earth color and now I need to mix it more, and what if it's not exactly the same? It's okay, it doesn't need to be exactly the same. If you're looking at any stretch of land, even if it's made up of the same kind of rock, there are variations in it all the way across. The key thing is, if you mix up a color that's slightly different from the first one, that you reintroduce it in another part of your painting, so that now it's not suddenly orange and yellow. You have a kind of a combination, just more dominant on one color than the other in another section. And that way, if you do get stuck and you aren't able to mix it exactly the same, it all works together anyway, as it does in nature, actually. So by making this a much warmer base and a lot lighter, we're popping this way forward, where these colors are grayed out and more muted. These ones we're kind of going to try to keep a little bit more vibrant. So there's our earth. Now what we want to do is go ahead and put in our trees, and then we'll start putting back in our shadows. I want to put in a little bit of green grass that is growing between the trees as well. So this is where I'm going to use my phthalo yellow green. You can make it as well by using phthalo green and a cadmium or a very bright Hansa yellow as well. And I'm going to just knock it back ever so slightly again with the orange. It just puts a little bit of earth back in the green, so it's not quite as bright as it could be. So I'm going to put a few little patches of the green between the trees. Where I'm not seeing my marks for the shadows, I'm putting a little bit of green in too. So I can see some earth and I can see some grass. Now I'm putting in color on this side. I'm just not putting a lot of high definition color. Some of it may go away when I put the cypress on, but also I know that my light source is over here on the right. So as I'm coming over here on the left, I'm probably not going to get as much light in this particular painting over there. All right, some trees. So I want to warm up my green, so I'm going to put the orange back in. But what I also want to do is gray them a little bit because they're an olive tree. So those are kind of a silvery tree. So I'm going to put a little bit of the ultramarine blue in there as well. Yep. And I'm going to use that same brush. However, you can also use a sea sponge. I'm going to take my sea sponge and I'm going to put some of that dark green on. And again, I'm going to just use that template, if you like, that we already created and put some trees in and just pouncing around. Again, this allows that open, broken kind of tree look rather than the smaller manicured trees that we would get otherwise. The trick with using the sponges, make sure they're moist when you start, but not so that when you wring them dry, there's any water dripping out. You want them to stop any water from dripping through. Otherwise, your paint is going to run down your canvas. And the other thing is to change the position that you're placing it on the canvas. Don't change it when you're on the canvas because you'll get a swirl. You just want to change it so that you're not getting a repeated pattern over and over again, because then it will look like someone came through and manicured your lovely olive trees. Okay, so now I want to add the lighter green. So let's go ahead and mix that. We've got the hooker green, our orange as we had before. That makes the base of the green that we're using. And then I want to add some yellow ochre. And then I'll put in some white. Still making that more of an olive green lightness. We're not getting too yellow, which we would do if it was a different kind of tree. I did not clean my sponge. I'm just going to go ahead and pounce it. As you notice, I'm just going to pounce a couple of times so that the paint goes onto the sponge but isn't in big globs. And I'm going to paint more light on the right side facing the tree or so. It doesn't have to be exactly down the middle. It just has to be heavily lighter on the right. So it kind of conforms with what we're seeing. And now I'm going to add just a little bit more white into that same mix. So now it's more white than green. Now I'm going to add a little bit more of that on the right, so little sprinkles of sunshine. Again, not every tree is going to get the same treatment. There we go. Now I want to put in some of the shadows. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead with that quinacridone crimson over the top of what I already had there with that dark, just to create a real fun crimson. This is best done when your trees are drier. And just kind of add some nice shadow in. And I'm using this in a very watered down way. And as you can see, I'm not trying to create perfect shapes of any kind. It's just shadows as they hit the ground. Now I'm going to add a little bit of blue to my quinidone crimson, my crimson, and I'm going to put in a darker shadow right in here, and I just want it to be more bold. And again, this one here, and my shadows are running off to the left, even though I haven't put my tree in yet. A little bit darker towards the top. Now let's make our tree colors. So I'm going to take my hooker green. I'm not putting orange in this time. I'm going to take some of that crimson and I'm going to make a very deep green, which again is still kind of slightly towards the gray side. And I'm going to put that on in an upward stroke on the left. And then I'm going to add a small amount of yellow ochre. And I'm going to start brushing that here on the middle section. I didn't clean my brush, so there's a slight blend of the darker color with the yellow ochre. And then I'll take the same colors almost that I used in here on that right side, and I didn't clean my brush, so some of the yellow ochre is coming out as well, which is great because it's not a solid block of one color versus another. What you want to avoid is having a central line, so I'm kind of cutting back and forth across a little bit. And then I'll put in the same again over here on the right, the dark. If you want to add a little orange in, it can change that color up a little bit too. We're keeping within the family of colors that we've got, but we're just lightening it up. Now I'm just picking up some yellow ochre and I'm adding that to the middle on my dirty brush. And so that creates the mix for me right there in the middle. Picking up the white lighter green that we used before over here on my right. So as you can see, I'm placing the paint on and then I'm doing a slight blend on that side. And I'll do the third one. Same dark. And then we have that green yellow there. We want to make all the greens a little bit different because they've got to be put up against the green that's already in the landscape. So if they're all the same, it wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to see one from the other. All right, so now I'm going to take the crimson and the dark blue and give myself a little bit of black, I think, to give us trunks. And I'm blending it slightly into the base of the cypress as well. Okay, so then we want to put these ones in there as in the background. So let's take that green and use some of that burnt sienna. Get it darker. And again, remember how we made them before? We had to get all that paint out of our brush. So I'm just going to wipe it off onto my palette. Make sure that my brush is reasonably clean and dry. And then I'm going to pick up that paint color again. And again, I'm going to slice it in. That's helpful because we're going over a black background of it. So it actually helps keep the color nice and deep. Here we go again. Put those in, giving us something to look through as we look at this lovely landscape we've just created. And then if you can see any areas where you would see the shadow, just pull the shadow off from the bottom across to the left. so that it looks like it's being affected by that. And then the very last thing, I'm going to use my round brush, numbers 0 or 2, and I'm going to, in this case, just use just the smallest amount of black and start pulling a few little trunks down, in case you see some. And the trunks can be just a straight line, or they can be a Y, and the Y can be up high or below, down low, depending on where the branches come. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little dot of black there and pull it across so it looks like it's rooted in the ground and creating a little bit of a deeper shadow where it's planted in. And that'll really kind of be mostly at the front, a little bit in the foreground, not a lot. You just go through, put a few little pieces in. So some of the things that we're putting in here are just an indication to the eye because it's an impressionist landscape. We don't need to have every little detail done. So I hope you've enjoyed creating our very fast, lovely landscape from a photograph and into this. Thank you for joining me.